All right. Good morning, judges. My name is David Dumonte, speaking the proudest affirmation of today's resolution. The United States federal government should substantially increase investment in hydroelectric. Now, what we're going to do today is basically outline our plan, two key impacts, and at any point, please, opposition, ask any questions because it's going to be a very, very dense plan. There's going to be a lot of material covered. Okay. So quite simply, our plan is to substantially increase hydroelectric power in the United States. A couple of things before we get into this on background. What is the current state of hydroelectric, and how will we substantially increase that? What do we mean when we say substantially increase? Okay, this current state of hydroelectric power, currently, as reported by the Department of Energy, 6.3% of US energy is hydroelectric. And somewhere in the ballpark of 20% of US renewable energy is hydroelectric. Another report by the International Renewable Energy Agency says that by 2050, we need 60% of our total energy to be hydroelectric if we want to curb climate change. So our plan is to define substantially increase as moving our 6.3 statistic to 60%. i.e., the United States should be, by 2050, 60% reliant on hydroelectric power. Now, for weighing mechanisms, judges, when we're getting to the end of today's round, we're going to be seeing who affects the most people. We're going to be looking at this through the realm of net benefits, or the lens of net benefits, but more specifically, we're going to be talking about net benefits through security of US energy supply. In addition to this, quality of US energy, basically saying who does the safest, most renewable form of energy and who emits the least amount of pollutants into the air. Are there any questions on the top of case before we get into the plan?
POI, I guess.
Yes.
Why is it that like other types of renewable energy could not fill the void that hydroelectric power is? Like, what makes
I'm
it
going to be
superior to
getting
other
to that
forms?
later on, but it's simply an efficiency issue. It's one of the most efficient forms. It's one of the cleanest forms. It's one of the most readily accessible, and it's one of the most researched. Because at the end of the day, this is a time frame thing. We're talking about implementing now versus in the future. Other forms in the future could warrant substantial increases in funding. We're talking about the now. Okay, now let's talk about our plan. Our plan is pretty complex, judges. Our actor is the United States Army Corps of Engineers, in conjunction with private contractors. They're going to be constructing the dams. And then we're going to have oversight review boards by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, the Department of Energy, the Department of the Interior, the Council for Environmental Quality, and then other state agencies. We're doing all of this and all of this regulatory practices to ensure that on every dollar, every piece of funding that is going towards this agency, towards these dams, is going to be used efficiently, is going to be used in a way where we don't see government corruption, where we don't see issues that plague any form of government spending, and we're doing so in a way to ensure maximum efficiency, maximum security, maximum net benefits at the end of the day. Okay, our action is quite simple. We're going to be massively increasing the amount of spending on research currently in the United States, as well as production, implementation, and construction of these dams. Currently within the United States, only about $150 billion is spent annually. No, $150 billion is being spent by 2030 on hydroelectric power. We want to increase that number to upwards of $250 billion. Basically saying by 2030, we want to be spending an additional $75 billion on hydroelectric power. We define that as substantial. It seems substantial enough. It's greater than 50. It's almost greater than 50%. No, it is greater than 50. It is exactly 50%. So that's the basic idea that we're trying to get to, substantially increasing this by 2030, and then continuing on a renewal-based process to continue this substantial amount of spending going on to the future. Our funding and enforcement mechanisms, we're going to cut down on farm subsidies. Right now, the main problem with US agricultural sector is there's an insane amount of farm subsidies. There's somewhere upwards of like $500 billion or something in total farm subsidies. So we're going to look at the most heavily subsidized and overly fields. No, thank you. Specifically, we're going to be looking at corn, we're going to be looking at wheat, we're going to be looking at dairy products, which have a gross amount of overspending in subsidies, and then we're going to be cutting those down to repurpose the funds. Yeah, that's our plan. What was your POI?
How do you think like decreasing farm subsidies will work since the price of most dairy products, wheat, etc., is at the highest it has been basically ever.
Well, the thing is, subsidies don't do anything to drive prices down. Like historically speaking, they simply secure they're supposed to secure the agricultural sector from points of crisis, but they don't do anything to drive prices down. If you subsidize an industry, it doesn't necessarily correlate to price drops. So the issues with the prices of goods like dairy, like eggs, etc., it's not an effective subsidy. Subsidies are simply money that is being wasted, basically. Three contentions as to why we should do our plan. Our first is using climate change to our advantage. One of the effects of climate change is increased rainfall. The effect of climate change is an increase in intensity and frequency of rainfall. Warmer oceans, where water evaporates more quickly, means more moisture-laden skies, and more moisture-laden air moves inland. That causes heightened rainfall. The United States Environmental Protection Agency reports that exponentially increasing rate of rainfall is a result of climate change. Is the way to solve climate change. We're using climate change, one of the effects of climate change, heightened rainfall, to produce clean energy. For every degree Celsius water vapor, there's more. Basically, water increases by 20% every degree Celsius that the world warms, meaning that rainfall increases. We're just capturing rainfall. It's the most efficient. 90% efficiency comes from rainfall, from hydroelectric. It's one of the most efficient renewable energies, and it's the one we have the most heavily researched. In addition to this, it protects against flooding. Scholarly articles by nature.org reports that it reduces flooding exposure by 20%, and it uniquely does this. Rainfall is going to cause intense flooding if we don't build dams. Let's use rainfall. Let's use it in an efficient manner. Let's protect against flooding. For all these reasons, implement our plan, affirm.
Okay. Thank you for that speech, leader. Prime Minister of Government. Sorry, it's a little bit early here. Okay. All right. Before I get started, I'd like to give a brief off-time roadmap here. So I'm going to start by just discussing the Gov case a little bit. Our second speaker will go more in depth on it, but I'll just kind of give an overview of our refutations, and I'll try and spend most of my time on discussing the government plan and contentions. Okay. Without further ado, my time starts on my first word. Okay, so essentially, we agree with the framework for the most part here, which is helping the most people. We just like to expand this framework a little bit to helping the most people and environment. So just kind of expanding the utilitarian framework just a little bit there. I don't think I will see any contention, as we both have arguments, I believe, as who can help the environment to the highest degree. As for my opponent's plan, there are kind of a few kind of glaring issues that I see here. Okay, so first off, the issue of farm subsidies and kind of getting rid of farm subsidies. So my opponents make the assumption here that at least initial results of climate change will happen, as it's kind of part of how they expect to fill the hours that they would need in order to power 60% of the United States. With increased rainfall and other results of climate change. Considering the idea that there would be, in fact, increased rainfall, increased flooding, EDC as a result of climate change, even if my opponent's plan does plan to reduce it, decreasing farm subsidies in a time where farmers and their crops would be probably most threatened, especially as we lose land to flooding. The idea that this would be the time to decrease farm subsidies is absolutely not the case.
Why?
Protected time, I'm sorry. Oh, actually, no, it's not protected time. Yeah.
If building hydroelectric dams protects against flooding and thus protects crops, why shouldn't we be building more of them?
Well, kind of the issue here is we don't actually think that that's okay. The problem here is, although it could protect crops, taking away the subsidies would hurt farmers a lot more in such a time of need than the minor kind of decrease in flooding. So it's kind of just a trade-off here that my opponents are making. They kind of assume that these subsidies are less valuable to farmers than, a minor decrease in flooding, which I just do not believe is the case. As for the $250 billion for hydroelectric power, this is just less than you would need for other types of power. For example, something like nuclear power is cited by the World. For example, something like nuclear power is cited by the World Nuclear Organization as a much lower cost of a kilowatt hour. therefore making it a much more cost-efficient way to do this, and also meaning we wouldn't have to decrease farm subsidies to the extent that my opponents would like to do so. Okay. And my opponent's first contention is about kind of ending climate change, is kind of about curbing the effects of climate change. We believe our case can do that as well, and that's why I'm going to get into our case right now. So our case is a little bit long, so if I'm going to be speaking a little bit quickly, if you need me to slow down, feel free to do so. Okay, so our first contention is about flooding. Hydroelectric power is most commonly found by damming rivers. It is also predicted that with the current current rate of increase of hydroelectric power in the United States, the amount of dams that will cause extreme flooding will go from 4% to 20% by 2050. This is because the United States federal government has essentially run out of safe spots to put hydroelectric dams. And now, in the current non-substantial rate of increase is going to cause severe flooding. If we substantially increase hydroelectric power in the United States,
Oh, can you explain how a dam which stops water increases flooding?
Okay, so if you kind of have a lot of water that boils up in one place, and you like increase the amount of water in one place while decreasing the amount of water in the other place, as the imbalance in like level is kind of an important part of a dam, you just have a higher likelihood of flooding. Also, it can lead to like kind of just irregularities in the way that water is flowing, which can also lead to buildups in certain parts of rivers. Especially when it comes to increased rainfall in areas like that, dams have a much harder time handling that than a freshwater river would. Okay, I'm not going to be taking any more POIs because I have a lot to get through. Even more importantly, these areas that are flooded will be in impoverished communities and communities of color. This, as you may expect, has a few key impacts. First, forcing impoverished people out of their homes and onto the streets, losing essentially everything they have, everything they've worked for. This is essentially the worst thing that you can do to these like communities, especially considering the housing crisis in America. Second, flooding will cripple jobs and by extension the economy. While America is already on the brink of recession, the last thing we need right now is another economic crisis like the one that would incur if entire towns, especially considering many factory towns that are on the basis of rivers, would be flooded and forced to move. Third, flooding will cause more of a climate and political crisis. For whatever small fraction of energy a substantial increase in hydroelectric power would create, politicians, organizers, and activists would be losing time and political capital, making it harder to work on other solutions. Our second contention is about marine life. So we have a few kind of subpoints. Our first subpoint under marine life is about water quality degradation. Degradation, I'm so sorry. Okay, so first off, we have thermal pollution. In a reservoir, thermal energy accumulates in the top layers closest to the sun, while the rest of the reservoir gets progressively colder. Water can then be drawn into a turbine through a penstock located at the bottom of the reservoir, altering the temperature of the water downstream. Drastic enough temperature changes can cause direct casualties in marine populations, but even minor changes can alter metabolic rates, reproduction, and growth of animals. Our second kind of point under water quality degradation is about mercury pollution. When land is flooded to create a reservoir, it is unsuitable for farming, wildlife habitat, or human recreation. Sorry. Mercury enters the water, and when elemental mercury is found within the rock and soil of the reservoir, it interacts with bacteria, released as a result of decomposition and submerged plant material. This interaction causes methyl mercury or more volatile dimethyl mercury. Both of these forms of mercury are water soluble and begin to accumulate within the water system. I know this was a lot of science talk. You don't really need to understand all of it in order to kind of get to the final impact here, which is that this mercury will begin to biomagnify within the food chain, eventually posing a health risk to people who rely on fish as a food source. So the impacts of our first subpoint here about water quality degradation are we have like huge health risks to consumers of seafood. Yes.
How many people rely on fish as a food source?
I don't have an exact number for you, but I guarantee you that like the number of people eating seafood that comes from rivers in America is a very, very high impact. I don't think an exact like statistic for you, considering this is parliamentary debate and it shouldn't be entirely reliant on a statistic. But I think you can just use your logic and like assume that there's a very high number of individuals who are relying on seafood, or at least eat a lot of seafood in America. And so our second impact here is huge casualties to marine life. Our second subpoint under marine life is about fresh water. It has been consistently the case that hydroelectric power is established to the detriment of marine life. In the instance of dams and inland hydroelectric power, thousands of fish are caught and killed while attempting to go downstream during migration periods. This can destroy the natural balance of an ecosystem, and thus certain species are forced out of their natural environments. When less destructive alternatives are already well established and easily expandable, there's no reason to continue with an environmentally destructive practice of building dams. And our last subpoint here is about salt water. When observing ocean-based hydroelectric power, most common in coastal areas and populous areas like LA and NYC, it is also the case that marine life is considerably damaged. Los Angeles Energy Commissioners report high marine life loss due to heat-based hydroelectric power. Okay. And with that being said, I would like to move on to our third and final argument of this debate, which is about alternatives. So our final argument is that there are more efficient and practical alternatives to hydroelectric power. Solar energy, for example, Dr. Matt Hasling of the University of California found that the U.S. Has the capacity to have enough solar panels operating not only power the, oh my God, sorry, that the U.S. has enough space for solar panels that could potentially power the entire world. These solar panels would come at a much lower cost than hydropower. Hydropower isn't even a good fit for most locations and require a large amount of space, unlike solar panels. And again, solar panels do not cause crises like those above. The same goes for wind turbines, nuclear energy, and more. There's no reason to prefer a less efficient and not widely applicable form of energy gathering to a more efficient and versatile one. And again, like I mentioned in my refutations, the World Nuclear Organization cites that due to the low cost of a kilowatt hour, nuclear energy is the most cost-efficient way to move into a sustainable energy future. Judge, with that being said, I would like to conclude my speech.
Thank you. So next speaker.
All right. I'm just gonna go over plans and stuff and then get right into it. Timer. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Dumonte, standing in the firmest affirmation of today's debate. I want to really quickly go over and defend the specific funding part when it comes to affirmation plan and make it clear that the negation accepted that our actor is going to be the EPA, among other agencies, such as the Department of Energy, the Department of the Interior, as well as state and congressional review boards, ensuring that the funding which is actually going toward these hydroelectric projects is allocated correctly. Do not let them come and refute this in their negation 2 or 3. Furthermore, I want to defend the funding. Negation says that because climate change is actually going to threaten these farms, but actually, if we implement dams, it's going to be the opposite. We read you an unresponded to statistic that the EPA says that as climate change increases, rainfall increases exponentially. When we get rainfall, we get crop growth. Yet at the same time, when we get rainfall, we get flooding. So nothing gets protected time. Let's use the both of these to our advantage. Number one, crops are actually going to go up because there will be more water available. Dams have the unique ability to collect that water so that if there is a time of drought, farms have that water readily available. Number one. Number two, because there's lots of water, that means if we don't build these dams, not only are we not taking advantage of the potential energy, but we're not protecting against floods. So not only are we losing the energy, but we're actually going to be harming the industry. So that's the first response. The second response is that actually farm subsidies do not actually regulate the flow of goods that they're supposed to. 95% of corn in America does not go for human consumption. It goes to cattle. The same with wheat and dairy. It's not exactly the same, but when it comes to dairy, large amounts of dairy are wasted. Thousands of gallons of dairy are wasted every single day. That's not an issue with production. That's an issue with the supply chain. The reason that lots of products are going up so high, we look at eggs, we look at dairy, we look at meat. The reason those products are going up so high is not because we don't have cows in the fields. It's not because we don't have wheat growing in the plains. It's because we don't have the supply chain infrastructure operating at the right issue. It is not an issue with subsidies. Actually, no, thank you. We have a glut of subsidies that there are industries worth billions of dollars made to lobby Congress to allocate these fundings. It is a corrupt system. By eliminating not all of these subsidies, we're not getting rid of every single subsidy. We're just going to slash each of them in half because the majority of these subsidies anyways get wasted. This is how we're going to get money for the project. Furthermore, I'd like to make it clear that negation says that negation says that we can invest in other technologies, but they don't tell us how much money we're going to invest. They provide an alternative of, oh, we could do this or we could do that, yet we're given no actual statistic about what that world is actually going to look like. As such, we can only assume that negation is operating under the status quo, and the negation is doing nothing different to combat climate change. I'll take your POI.
Okay. Why would nuclear energy or another thing not be more efficient when it has higher efficiency in kilowatt per
Well, I'm
hour?
going to get to that in a couple of reasons. Number one, we actually get no statistic from the negation giving us the efficiency of nuclear energy insofar that it is too late for them to do so, because it would give my affirmation speaker, it would be unfair to give my affirmation speaker to respond to basically an entirely new substantiated point. But we tell you specifically in our speech that goes on, our first speech that goes unresponded to, that hydroelectric energy, number one, can be built quickly. And a dam takes 1 decade to build at most, whereas nuclear takes a lot longer. Wind and solar takes a lot longer to get approved in the first place, not to mention the environmental effect from mining precious metals. And number three, we have 90% efficiency from hydroelectric. We get no statistic from the negation. We have no way to actually see how much energy is being produced by these other resources. And now I'm going to move on really quickly to refute negation's case. To their first contention about flooding, their first subpoint, they were talking about how dams cause flooding. We have two responses. The first is that what's going to happen is that rivers which cannot handle the increase in rainfall from climate change are going to flood regularly. That means that towns that are built on rivers that would otherwise be protected by dams are actually going to experience a greater flooding. So our second response is that these dams are reducing flooding. If there is a floodplain and there's not a dam built there, then increases in water because of the irregular water flow is actually going to increase the variability of flooding. By building dams, we can make sure that we protect these communities. The second contention, they're talking about job loss and about small towns. Again, dams actually protect because they can dam up a river. They can regulate the amount of water. If there's a freak rain that wasn't expected, number one, we can use that. We can stop that rain from flooding a community. Number two, we can collect that rain for later in times of potential drought. Number three, we can use that rain for electricity. We have a unique three-pronged approach. We are not just creating electricity, we are saving communities from the further impacts of climate change. So we agree that the other resources of energy are actually good for fighting climate change, like nuclear, but they have one purpose. Nuclear just produces energy. Wind just produces energy. Dams have the unique ability to protect communities and make sure that they are economically viable and that the people there have water to live into the future. They talk about how flooding is actually, that we're going to have to that we're going to spend billions of dollars on flooding damages. This is actually not true, because yes, dams initially are expensive upfront, but that's the entire point of investment. It is initially expensive, but over a long period of time, it pays off. Over time, it's going to be cheaper. To their second contention about marine life, they talk about how water quality is going to go down because something about temperature differences. But we say that it would be actually that the world would be worse when it's flooding, because what that looks like in times of climate change is that if we don't regulate the flow of a river, that means that rivers could run dry at entire points of time unexpectedly, and rivers could overflow unexpectedly. Do you think this is good for marine life? This is actually worse for marine life. Number one. Number two, is this happening with every single dam? Is it happening with every dam in every region of the world? It's disingenuous to say that every single dam all across the world is affected by the same phenomena. Each environment is different. To their second subpoint, they talk about mercury. We ask one simple question. Where is this mercury coming from? Mercury is not an element found all across the world. It's an element found in specific areas of the world. That's why there are specific mercury mines in specific areas of the world. It's disingenuous to say that mercury is everywhere on every floodplain and every river basin. That's our first response. The second response is how many people are actually going to be affected by this. It's nice to say that everybody in the United States eats fish, but number one, that's simply not true. Number two, even if it were true, when we looked back to our framework of net benefits, how many people are truly being affected? We need numbers here, or we can't quantify it. It's not enough to say that parliamentary debate doesn't let you have a source, because the thing is, we can't fairly debate this. If we say everyone eats fish, no one eats fish, there's actually no ground being gained. Give us some numbers, give us some way to quantify this actual effect. To the third contention about fresh water, we have a couple of responses. Number one, new technology actually works around fish. There are entire fish highways, believe it or not, that are allowing fish to go between dams, between upwater and below water, to make sure that it actually doesn't disrupt the cycle, number one. Number two, there won't be fish in the first place to navigate these rivers if the rivers dry up because we don't regulate the flow. So we would say that we're actually protecting the fish. Number three, they bring up alternatives. They bring up solar. Number one, we get no actual quantifiable statistics as to how efficient these are. We get no actual numbers as to how cheap they are. And actually, they're more in the long run, they're more expensive to maintain. They're more difficult to maintain, and they're worse for the environment. Nuclear waste can be spilled and can pollute an environment for hundreds of years. Solar panels require precious metals mined in Central Africa, which pollute local and global environments. Concrete used to make hydroelectric dams is uniquely eco-friendly because that is the only resource going into it. It is incredibly environmentally friendly. It has a 90% return rate on electricity. Vote affirmation if you want to not only work around climate change, but use climate change to our advantage.
I thank my opponents for their eloquent remarks, and if everyone's ready, I can begin whenever. Okay, just for a quick off time, I'm going to go over kind of two big overview things. Then I'm going to go through my opponent's plan really step by step and analyze it for you, go through their case, and finally end on my case. And Jasper will be doing most of the winning since he's third. Okay, time starts now. First, my opponents try to make two big, broad assumptions about parliamentary debate itself. First, they tell you that I cannot bring up any new points in my speech because it would be unfair to them. However, that's just not true. Third speakers, rebuttalists, cannot bring up any new points, but second speakers have full right to do so. It's not fair that my opponents have two constructive speeches when they're forcing us into a box of only having one. This is not the rules of parliamentary debate, and if my opponents want to go debate the rules with Tab or something like that, they are free to do so. But right now, we should prioritize actually looking at the rules that we have right now. I'm able to bring up new points, Jasper's not, and their third speaker can only refute new points that I bring up, and with a new point and nothing else. Secondly, my opponents have this fixation on stats. They tell you that it doesn't matter that parliamentary debate is not based on statistics because we need statistics to understand things. I think they're missing the key point of what parliamentary debate is. It's trying to look at things without stats. It's trying to look at things looking at logic and actually basing your and trying to logic your way out of things. You don't need to say, well, 1 second. You don't need to say, well, exactly 123 million and 3 people are going to die. You need to say that, you know, these coastal areas rely on fish and people there will die of mercury or whatever the example is. Yes.
Given that we are both agreed framework is net benefits, i.e. who helps the most people, wouldn't you say it's entirely reasonable to request numbers to see who really helps the most people quantifiably?
No, I think that's exactly what I'm saying, is that it's not entirely reasonable because you can think of things in other ways than numbers. Let's take, you know, our New York and LA examples, right? We tell you that New York and LA putting just putting heat-based hydroelectric power in New York and LA would lead to a significant loss of marine life in both areas, making it much harder for 2 cities that are near the coast or coastal to get a major source of food and energy. The reality is that no, I cannot quantify how many of the 8.9 million people in New York are going to lack fish, but I can tell you that there's going to be a significant decrease harming a majority of people. That's enough evidence right there to let you know, Judge, how many people are going, or not how many people are going to be harmed, but a good ballpark, right? You can still evaluate off of that. Also, just on this on the topic of saltwater and heat-based hydroelectric, my opponents never refuted this. They have this was introduced in Jasper's speech. This flows cleanly through. Okay, no, thank you, by the way. Okay, let me get into my opponent's plan, and I really want to just analyze it for you. First, at the top of their case, my opponents tell you that we need to make we're going to make 60% of U.S. energy hydroelectric. Okay, I'm not going to refute this, but I have 2 kind of questions for them. Where's your logic here? I see a stat, but I also know that, you know, we can more efficiently cover the U.S., or not cover the U.S., but add solar panels to the U.S., looking at Dr. Hassling from the University of California, who tells us we can. I know that nuclear energy is cheaper and has the same result as hydroelectric. So I don't really see how the statistic comes about or how it really works. And you need logic to back up your stats, right? Anybody can come up with a number, but to really understand how that number works, that's what we should be talking about. But this statistic's going to play in a little later in my analyzation, so just keep that in the back of your head. Okay, next in their plan, my opponent tells you that we're going to use the Army Corps of Engineers. But if we're going to increase hydroelectric power from 6% to 60%, an order of magnitude, using just the Army Corps of Engineers by 2030 is not going to be enough. We simply do not have enough people to create, no thank you. We simply do not have enough people to create that many dams that quickly. Okay, the next part of my opponent's plan, that's where I think their logic really gets messed up. They tell you that we're just going to spend 50% more. But if you remember, they also want to increase the amount of hydroelectric energy that we're using by an order of magnitude. This does not add up. If we're going to increase from 6% to 60%, but only increase our funding by 50%, that's not going to add up. Something's got to give, right? Either we're not going to be able to increase it to 60%. Yeah, let me pause my time. I'm at 3:46.
On our plan, two things. Specifically, we outlined more actors than just the Army Corps of Engineers. In addition to that, we explained to you that our funding is on an annual basis. It's not simply a lump sum.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna pause time to respond to that, just really quick. Time still pause. Just to be very clear, you said the Army, as far as I can understand, you said the Army Corps of Engineers was to well, first off, that's not what a point of clarification is. It's to clarify something about our case. You can clarify that in your speech, so it's kind of rude to interrupt. But secondly, you said the Army Corps of Engineers was going to be building the dams. And finally, yeah, I'm talking about an annual basis too, right? If we're going to increase it by, if we're going to have to run like 1,000% more dams, that's kind of a problem. If we're only increasing like money by 50% every year. It is annually, I understand that. Okay, so time resumes. Let me get more into their case. Finally, the kind of last part of their plan is about farm subsidies. They tell you that farm subsidies are basically useless, except like they're kind of there to make sure farms don't fail in a time of crisis. Not really, they say it's not really relevant. I think it's especially relevant right now as the US is on the brink of recession, right? Farm subsidies, they're like uselessness. Yes, we'll admit it's pretty useless most of the time, but when we're on the brink of recession, that's when we need the farm subsidies the most. And when we have unprecedented inflation, that's when we need the farm subsidies the most. And that's what we have right now. We have eggs at their highest price in ever, and we have a recession looming, right? Farms need that help right now, if ever. Like if they ever would. Okay. Next, let's kind of get into the big crux of their argument. My opponents kind of talk, well, their entire case is about climate change and like using rainfall to help this. Just one quick thing. As far as I can tell, my opponents don't have control of rainfall. They can't tell me that, you know, the majority of rainfall is going to flood into rivers, and then there's just going to be a nice little bit on farms, right? For all we know, we're going to have flooded farms and dried up rivers, right? There's no way to, you know, dam up a farm, and you can't really create hydroelectric from a river. That's a kind of logical fallacy here, that they can totally control how all rain falls. They can't, unfortunately. Furthermore, consider that we quite literally, like the dams in the US, for example, dams in California are notoriously bad at collecting things from rainfall, right? In California, for example, California had unprecedented rainfall, yet they're predicted to have the most severe drought of one of the most severe droughts ever this summer because they did not successfully collect the rainfall with high quality dams. Okay, now let's kind of get into my case. First, on our flooding argument, my opponents seem to kind of be confused about how this argument is structured. So let me make it really clear. No, thank you. Okay, so the flooding argument, my opponents say that rivers will flood because of climate change and dams protect from flooding. Two quick things. When you dam up a river, it causes flooding. You can't collect that water. That water leads to the entire area above the dam being flooded. That's how it works. And right now, right, in the status quo, we're going to have an increase of flooding by 500% by 2050. A substantial increase in dams will cause this number to obviously go up. And the reason for that is the places we can put dams right now, we've run out of places where we can put dams without flooding. So we're in a position where we have to put dams in rivers in places where it will flood. These are the facts. My opponents cannot just say, oh, well, we'll fix it, because we don't have any other places to put it. Okay, and then housing, the economy, and then and climate change are three impacts for this. They're not arguments themselves, but they're the impacts, right? A harm of housing on especially in impoverished communities and communities of color. People being displaced causes a lack of jobs, right? They can't get their jobs back, etc., leading to even worse landing for the economy. And also this causes a waste of political capital for politicians. Okay, on to our marine life argument. First, on water quality degradation, my opponent says that mercury isn't everywhere, yet we clearly tell you that while mercury probably isn't everywhere, it's going to go into the rivers and harm Americans who eat fish, right? People eat fish. It's pretty simple here. Furthermore, my opponents kind of say, well, we can't prove how many people. Yeah, but the majority of US is coastal. Like fishing in rivers is a massive thing. That's a lot of people, right? That's at least 100 million. Finally, on alternatives, my opponent just says that this just produces energy and does not protect communities from climate change. It protects communities from climate change by taking away the largest source of harmful. For our alternative argument, like the alternatives that we kind of provide all protect communities from climate change by taking away the biggest producers of CO2 emissions, which are fossil fuels and natural gases. Thank you, and it is for all of those reasons that I urge an opposition ballot. And if any of you have questions, I'm free to answer. or later.
Okay. Thank you for your speech. Member of opposition. Okay. All right. Before we start, I'll give a brief off-time roadmap. My teammate has done all of the refutations, so you can just extend all of those. So I will just be doing Wang in this final speech. Okay. With that being said, I will start my time. Okay, so I mean, I kind of when we're weighing this debate, I think ultimately the thing that we're trying to prove to you, based on this net good framework, is that there are alternatives, and that our alternatives are better than, instituting hydroelectric power. So, kind of the alternatives that we've suggested to hydroelectric power are nuclear reactors, solar panels, and wind turbines were the main three. So we cited a few sources that have given you statistics on how they're more efficient, how they're less ecologically destructive, etc. But I think my opponent's real kind of refutation here, aside from a few others, which I'll get into in a moment, is that we don't have like concrete statistics for basically every sentence we've said. And I think this kind of leads into a fundamental misgiving about what parliamentary debate is about. If we can logically prove why a thing would happen, which I believe we have, and there's been kind of unrefuted logic basically this whole time, except for the few bits of logic I'll get into in a second. Then I think we should essentially win this debate. Ultimately, parliamentary debate isn't who can have the high statistic, although that can support one's logical argument. But again, if my opponents cannot logically refute our case, other than just beg for statistics, this is again not a win for them. Okay, so with that being said, I want to get into some of their specific kind of refutations to our three, proposed alternatives. So probably our first and biggest alternative that we've proposed this debate is nuclear reactors. My opponent's one, I guess, logical refutation to this is that nuclear reactors create nuclear waste, as opposed to hydroelectric dams, which only require concrete. Okay, so first, if I would like to say that, in order to do concrete that is actually completely sustainable and doesn't produce any CO2 in its production, requires a lot more cost than just normal concrete would. So already probably a lot of the statistics that they have used, or a lot of the reasoning they have used when they gave us numbers about funding, are probably at this point skewed, considering that they've kind of brought up this new idea of cost of a oh my god, what was it? Oh, a new idea of perfectly biodegradable concrete. Secondly, considering the idea that nuclear reactors create nuclear waste, yes, but they haven't really quantified how that nuclear waste really harms anybody. The only thing that really happens to nuclear waste is buried in underground facilities and barely ever touches anybody. Any failure, any instance in which nuclear waste is leaks into the environment is a result of human error. And again, human error can result in any of our cases, causing to ecological destruction. Again, human error could cause miscalculations in a dam to burst and cause huge flooding in an area. Human error could cause a hydroelectric dam to or a coastal water treatment facility to explode, etc. If we're just talking about these things in theory or in practice, nuclear reactors are more efficient, and we've kind of proved to them, and we've kind of at this point proved to that they don't really have a logical response to them. Next, we have solar panels. Their response to solar panels was that they require rare metals. Again, was that they require rare metals. Again, this is a circumstance where even if they do require rare metals, they haven't really quantified the harm here. And lastly, we have wind turbines, and they said that those require high maintenance. And they haven't they really haven't quantified the problem here. Basically, essentially, all of these things require high maintenance in order to maintain. So ultimately, now that I've kind of proven to you that we have kind of three distinct paths to the ballot here. Ultimately my opponents kind of have zero. If we can prove to you that we have several, or I suppose they have one path to the ballot here, which is proving that somehow hydroelectric dams are better than a combination or one of these three alternatives. And considering that they don't really have time to bring up new arguments about about all of these kind of things that they brought up in their second speech, and I'm going through my grace period now, it just seems to be the case that all of our alternatives are better than their one, and they kind of haven't proven otherwise. Thank you, Judge, for your time, and I urge it off the opposition.
All right, everyone's ready? I want to start with this idea of statistics and how we're quantifying things before we get into anything actually substantial in today's round. when we ask side opposition to give us statistics, we're not asking them to give us specific numbers. We're asking them to give us what they mean when they say significantly or significant percentage of New York, Los Angeles, of these key metropolitan areas. They tell you the population of New York is 8.9 million people, and they will be significantly impacted. Okay, is 10% a significant amount of them? Is 20%, 30%, 100%? Are we talking about 800,000 people, 1 million people, 2 million people, 3 million people, 8 million people? They give us no way to quantify the true
POI.
impact. It's third speech. There's no
Or
POI.
POO, sorry, POO.
Sure.
That's what I meant. Sorry about that. Just to be clear, the assertion that statistics are not like hard numbers is completely new in the third speech, also inaccurate. But more.
Okay, before I continue my time, this has been continued rhetoric that has been brought up on side opposition that somehow statistics don't matter. We're giving you continual rhetoric across affirmation bench that the only way for you judges to make a decision is if you understand what it means to have a significant impact. They tell you there's a significant impact, but what does that mean? That's the question we're trying to ask at the end of the day. That's the argument I'm trying to make. It's been continued across affirmation bench. Judges, I'm sure you're flowing this. Let's continue our speech today. Okay, our second point under this. They tell us that they can't bring up new points. I don't think this is a whole argument. I have 5 minutes to respond to 12 minutes of speech. All we're asking is that we keep it a little bit more fair in that regard. But now, I want to get into 5 areas of clarification before we get into weighing. First, I want to talk about this idea of how we can't control the rain. Judges, rain falls into rivers. It goes into areas of low elevation. Rain doesn't fall into farmlands and then flood the farmlands. It falls down, obviously, as a blanket, and then concentrates into rivers. That's how rain works. We can't control it necessarily. We can't control the intensity and the frequency, and that's exactly the point. But we can control where it goes because we know where rivers are. It's just how rainfall works. They say we can't control rain. Judges, we can because we build dams. The second thing, a product of dams is what a reservoir is. They tell you flooding happens at the top side of a dam. That is what a reservoir is. That's how we store water. Judges, the flooding they're talking about isn't bad flooding, it's storage. The reservoir at the top, the area that is being flooded, quote unquote, is the storage of water. And then additionally, our third point under this is that it regulates the flow of water because now we can control how much water goes from upstream to downstream. Because if another unregulated dam, imagine a river, judges. You have a river with no dam. There's just rainfall going. It can increase in mass quantity and it can decrease in mass quantity. You could have mass flooding or you could have no water at all. Now imagine if you had a dam, you have a reservoir. You can regulate how much water goes through at the end of the day. You can control and safeguard against flooding. Regulation of water flow is a unique impact that goes unresponded to by side negation in today's round because we're the only side that puts a break in the river system to ensure that point A or the farms down here at point B aren't simply flooded every single time it rains heavily or don't have a drought every time there's no rainfall. Third, they tell you that California is notoriously bad for storing water. Okay, isn't that a reason we should increase funding to make it better at storing water? The whole point on how California is a bad actor and in the past has not worked in storing water and it's completely inefficient. That's a reason we should increase funding, not decrease funding. If we decrease funding, it's just going to make a worse problem. That's a new point that's brought up in their second speech. I'm giving new refutation to this point. Okay, now let's get into this idea of majority coastal cities. That if so many of the US population is on majority of the coast, they're not eating river fish, they're eating coast fish. That's a new point that's brought up in their second case, that a majority of US cities are on the coast, then they're not eating from river fish. They're not affected by mercury poisoning. They're eating coastal fish. They're eating cows. They're eating pigs. They're eating chicken. They're not eating fish. They give you no statistics as to how many people are actually eating river fish. Again, judges, ask yourself a couple of questions about their alternatives. What do you know about nuclear energy? They don't tell you how efficient it is. They don't tell you the cost. They don't tell you how accessible it is, how researched it is, how quick it is to build. We get nothing about how efficient it actually is. But look at our version, Judge. Look at our plan. We tell you uniquely, it is 90% efficient to implement hydroelectric. It stops flooding by 20%. Additionally, it regulates water flow and ensures that in times of drought and also in times of heavy rainfall, you have the same flow of water. Impact this out to the end of the day with net benefits when we tell you who helps the most people, because we're the only side that proves to you how many people we help. We help millions of people through these three prongs that we tell you: through security, through the security of the water system, through flooding, through saving energy, through reservoirs, and electric efficiency. We're the only side who gives you quantifiable evidence to decide at the end of the day. Side negation has none of that with their alternatives. Affirm to save our water systems, to regulate our water systems. Affirm to build dams.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think it was good debate,
Good debate.
both sides.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good job, guys.
Well, so we'll
Good
come
job.
back in a few minutes.
Okay, sounds good, everybody.
sorry, I was in.
So Teresa, you would like to go ahead, or I can?
You can go first if you want.
Okay, so it was good debate. I think both teams did really well. Good arguments and good refutations, both sides. My vote, so I voted for Gov. I will give my reasoning. First, um, Gov started very well. They explained how they will, what is the problem, how they will increase the funding, and how it benefits climate change by having dams, how they will stop flooding. Uh, Government opposition came up with good points, and they talked what are the what are the harms with the dams, with mercury getting there, how it affects marine life. And they came up with alternatives. Where I think I would have liked more is, and then government came back with reputations that saying that alternatives, there were not much statistics provided for alternatives, and dams in fact help in storage rather than in flooding, which will help in the end. So yeah, so it was very, very slight edge to government side. That's what I gave with their refutations. So I think that's where I came to the decision.
Pack of dogs here. Okay, sorry. So again, I also thought this was a very good debate. I thought both teams had very strong contentions as well as very strong refutations. I too did give the ballot to Gov. And here's why. I actually thought opposition had potentially stronger points. I mean, potentially substantially very stronger points, but what I did not see within that was pulling the logic through. So I would have been forced to make the assumptions of the mercury in the streams flows down to the coastal cities, making it therefore impacting the populations of the fish. And so as a judge, I don't want to do that. I want you to tell me what the implications and the impact of your points are. So I also think that you made a very strong point about the need for subsidies now and the impact of why reducing the subsidies are important. I just thought that Gov had a slight advantage in pulling through the implications and impacts of their point in their plan a little more clearly. So again, it was very, very close, and I thought both teams had great points, but I also, similar to Vishal, voted for Gov in this case. Any questions?
No, thank you. Great job, guys.
Thanks. Great job, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
Bye.